Peter Parker, the Amazing Spider-Man, is finally coming to Marvel's Avengers for PlayStation players on November 30th. Now, we've seen a lot from the character so far, but there's still so much we don't know yet. However, I wanted to give some suggestions on reading material and other media that I think might be fun to consume given the glimpses of Spider-Man that we've seen so far. So, in today's video, I'm going to give some Spider-Man reading suggestions for you to check out before he comes out in the game.
Stars and Stripes!
Hello and welcome to another Carrot Scraps video, and by another, I mean the 84th. Quick disclaimer before we start off the video, keep in mind that when you're checking out my recommendations, I don't know very much about Spider-Man and what's coming to the game on the 30th. This is all just speculation based on what you and I have both seen from the promotional material. Anyway, before we move on to my recommendations, I thought it would be a good idea to go over what we know about Spider-Man so far in Marvel's Avengers. First of all, we know that Spider-Man is Peter Parker, which some of you might say is expected, but I personally was waiting on bated breath for the longest before this announcement. This version of Peter Parker is in college and out of high school, which I'm also really happy to hear. I'm not against high school Peter Parker, but I feel we get way too many depictions of him during that era. We know that part of Peter's story in the game will be him interacting with some new dangerous aim technology, which to me means that this version of the character is really embracing the intelligence of Peter Parker. I feel in the last 8 years specifically, we've seen a lot more focus on Peter's intelligence in the comics. Before that, I feel like his intelligence wasn't referenced as often as it is now, but it's nice to see that that's being embraced in this interpretation. Something I wouldn't say that we know about the Spider-Man of the game so far, but that I personally think might be true, is that Spider-Man is potentially an influencer in the universe of the game. In the illustrated short featuring Spider-Man, we got a story from the perspective of Peter talking to an audience through social media. In addition, multiple emotes in promotional images feature Peter holding a cell phone. Now, maybe I'm reading too far into this, but in my opinion, I think these are big hints that Spider-Man is some form of influencer in this world. Not Peter Parker, but Spider-Man himself. And I think that could lead to some interesting story or character details for the game. And the final detail about the character that I think is important is that he'll be teaming up with the Black Widow and Miss Marvel. And I'm really excited to see what those three characters get up to together. And even though it seems as if he has a friendly relationship with these characters and the other Avengers, it also seems like he's going to be protecting his secret identity at all costs, even from people he considers to be his friends. And this interpretation I think is really interesting. But that basically gets everything out of the way, so without further ado, let's get into my recommendations. And if you want to check out any of these comics and you don't have a comic shop near you, or you can't find it physically online, you can read other comics on Comixology, you can buy them individually, or you could check out a subscription service called Marvel Unlimited. Hashtag not sponsored. It's essentially the Netflix of Marvel Comics. Or should I say the Disney Plus of Marvel Comics? I don't know. I don't know what's on brand. So first on my recommendation list are some comics that feature Peter Parker and Kamala Khan teaming up. Since we're seeing them team up in the game, I thought this would be a good suggestion. Plus, in general, I feel like these two characters don't team up enough. In the comics, they have a generational gap keeping them in two separate social groups. But they have some key details in common that I think make them interesting to see together. One of their early team-ups was in an Amazing Spider-Man comic published right before the original Spider-Verse event hit. This wasn't a particularly deep team-up, but it's definitely a notable one considering how early it was to see them together. In future team-ups, I feel like these characters would become more familiar with each other, but in this specific team-up, it seemed as if Peter was more of a mentor role to Kamala, and it seemed as if their relationship was extremely professional, which again is interesting given how they'll interact later. The more notable team-up that I would suggest is their more recent meeting in Marvel Team-Up. I think this comic really shows how much fun you can have with these characters when you highlight their similarities. In this book, they experience the classic Freaky Friday or Dr. Octopus plot point where they switch bodies and brains, and then they have to experience each other's lives and gain a new perspective. It's a simple plot, of course, but the art of the comic is really great, and I think it's one of the best Kamala and Peter Parker team-ups in media so far. But that being said, there really aren't that many Kamala and Peter team-ups in popular culture. That's one thing that I'm extremely excited to see happen in Marvel's Avengers. They're about to be another early example of these two characters interacting, and they could set the precedent for what these characters are like together moving forward. Anyway, definitely check out Marvel Team Up if you want to see what I think the best interactions are between Peter and Kamala in the comics.
Did someone say Spider-Man?
Oh my goodness! It's Spider-Man villain Michael Morbius. What are you doing here, the living vampire?
Well, as you know, I'm always hunting that rascal Spider-Man. But today, I'm here to talk to you about my upcoming film Morbius. Morbius is hitting theaters in January of 2021.
Whoa, whoa, Morbius, stop. Whoa, what are you doing?
What? Oh, I'm talking about my upcoming film, Morbius, striking theaters January
Morbius, what are you doing?
2021.
This is not what we talked about before you came on here. You can't just come on to one of my YouTube videos and promote your movie. We're here to talk about like Spider-Man. I have a whole like subject. You said that what you were going to talk about is related.
Related to Spider-Man? Of course I'm related to Spider-Man. You see, I'm part of the Sony universe that's connected to the...
Stop. I don't care about the movie. We're not talking about the movie. Where did the copy go? I gave you something to read. You were supposed to go on a script. You don't just get to come here and promote your own movie.
Will you watch Morbius, please?
I'll consider it, but another time, Michael. We can talk about this another time, please. I'm doing something. Crystal Dynamics is creating their own version of Spider-Man and Peter Parker with his own unique lore inspired by other Spider-Man media. However, he's also going to be coming to the game with a number of skins that pay homage or reference Spider-Man stories and continuity in various other ways. Now, it's really up for debate whether the skins in Marvel's Avengers are canon to the story, but generally I think they exist outside of canon or in an in-between canon spot until they're confirmed to actually be part of the universe. For example, like the Ultimate Iron Man skin that we saw referenced in the animated Spider-Man short. Either way, I wanted to really quickly give some reading recommendations based on the skins coming to the game for Spider-Man. The multiverse of Spider-Man characters is a pretty common idea now, but after characters like Mayday Parker and Miguel O'Hara, I feel like Spider-Man Noir really encouraged the desire to see more alternative versions of Spider-Man teaming up with one another in media. It's such a simple idea. What if Spider-Man were a noir character? But this simple idea has persevered way longer than I ever expected it to. So much so that this alternative version of Spider-Man is now a fan favorite and even was one of the lucky characters to be in the main cast of Spider-Verse, the movie that is. So I recommend checking out the original Spider-Man Noir comic to see where the character started. I think you'll find he's much grittier than his more comedic recent entries. In addition to the original Spider-Man Noir comic, the character has continued publication over the years, and he just had a comic book released fairly recently that I'd also recommend you checking out, especially because I feel like he's written slightly different in modern times versus his inception. And I think that checking out contrast between depictions of characters is always really interesting. Seeing where Spider-Man Noir started and seeing where he eventually went is something really interesting to me. Anyway, let's move on to our next recommendation. One of the original skins coming to the game when Spider-Man drops is the Bugle Boy skin. This skin depicts Peter Parker in his civilian clothes while he is also wearing his Spider-Man mask at the same time. But something that stuck out to me the most was that his civilian clothes feature a well-dressed, dapper sweater vest. Now, if you know anything about classic Spider-Man comics, you know Peter Parker wore a sweater vest very frequently, that dweeb. So seeing this reference was really cool in my opinion, because a lot of modern depictions of Peter Parker will avoid dressing him like he's from the 60s essentially. But while this skin is definitely giving me flashbacks to the original Stan Lee and Steve Ditko comic book run, which by the way on a side note, I highly recommend, the original Spider-Man stories may be a little dated, but I think they hold up extremely well in modern times. So if you haven't read those yet, read. Go read them. They're very nice. They're very good. But anyway, while this skin definitely gives me Lee Ditko vibes, the story that kept coming to my mind when I looked at this skin was the Dan Slott flashback story called Learning to Crawl. This story is a modernized revisit of Peter's adolescent life. It features Peter's high school struggles in a modern setting and platforms the origin of a new supervillain named Clayton Cole, or as he's more commonly known in the supervillain scene, Clash. Like I said, it's a simple story. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the upcoming DLC, other than the fact that I'm reminded of it constantly when looking at the Bugle Boy skin. So check it out if that sounds interesting to you. Ends of the Earth is one of my favorite Spider-Man stories ever, and it features one of the coolest Spider-Man costumes of all time in my opinion. So it should be no surprise that I'm extremely happy and excited that we're getting a version of the Ends of the Earth Spider-Man armor for Avengers. The original story does a great job of putting Peter Parker on the big stage as a superhero in my opinion. Oftentimes, Peter Parker is a street-level hero, which is honestly what I prefer, but it's still nice to see him visit the big stage every now and again, fight with the bigger superheroes, and fight the bigger supervillains. And when I think of a big-scale Spider-Man story, Ends of the Earth is what comes to mind. I can't recommend the story enough, especially for this game specifically, which is going to pit Peter Parker against a world threat like AIM while he's teaming up with the Avengers. I think this story could be a really interesting read, giving its similarities to the main story of the game. Plus, it inspired one of the coolest Spider-Man costumes that we're going to get to see in the game.
Is it rude if I just pop in really quickly?
It's not rude, but if you know what I'm going to say if you're going to talk about your movie.
I would Why can't I talk about my movie?
It's just one of those things. Okay, look, it's just one of those things. If you had told me you were coming to talk about the movie, I would have been okay with it. But you didn't say that. You came on and you had a whole other thing that you wanted to talk about. You were talking about blood cells. You were talking about Spider-Man. But it's just very strange. It feels like a bait and switch. Now, to close out the video, I'm going to talk about some non-comic book media. I know this was supposed to be a Spider-Man comic book recommendation list specifically, but I couldn't help myself. While looking at the promotional material for Spider-Man, I kept thinking of all this other Marvel media. So this recommendation is a little off topic for the video, but I'm going to go with it anyway because it's my channel and you have to deal with it. The voice actor for Spider-Man in Marvel's Avengers was revealed to be Sean Chiplock, who from what I can tell seems to be pretty new to the role of Peter Parker, but it's not his first Marvel role. Looking at his previous credits, you'll find he's played a lot of Marvel characters, but in somewhat of an unconventional way. Years ago, Marvel created an animated web series, no pun intended, called Marvel TLDR. This series consisted of cartoon shorts that would essentially recap iconic or significant Marvel comic stories in a quick comedic way to get new readers or Marvel fans caught up on big events in the Marvel Comics universe. Anyway, our new Spider-Man voice actor has a large number of credits in this series, so if you're a Marvel fan and you're excited about Spider-Man, I can't think of a better way to spend your time before the 30th than checking out Marvel TLDR. It's bizarre, it's funny, and if you don't have time to read the comics, it's a great way to educate yourself. Another piece of Marvel media that I was reminded of when looking at the Spider-Man promotional material from the game was an animated Spider-Man series. It seems that the Marvel's Avengers version of Spider-Man might potentially be an internet influencer, which is very unique to me and is something I'm really curious to learn more about. But it also reminds me of the animated Spider-Man series from 2017, where Peter Parker vlogs his early days as Spider-Man. I mentioned at the start of the video that I personally think that Spider-Man might be some kind of influencer. So in that vein of speculation, I recommend you check out stories featuring the Spider-Man supervillain known as Screwball, specifically her introduction in Amazing Spider-Man. But we've also seen her a handful of times since then in Superior Spider-Man and even in the Insomniac Spider-Man game. Now, if you're not familiar, Screwball is a supervillain who films and live streams her criminal activity from a helmet she wears. I think in general she's a fun and interesting character who explores the idea of a superhero character expressing themselves on social media, so I think this is one possible way we could see Peter work in the world of the video game. Even though they fight on two opposite sides of the law, I think it's possible they could share some similarities in the way they express themselves. And generally speaking, I feel like superheroes having a social media presence is still an untapped potential for stories. Interestingly, Spider-Man recently had an arc in the main Amazing Spider-Man comics where he did a similar thing to Screwball. He would fight crime and stream it on a Twitch-like platform from his visor, in a very new and interesting costume, I might add, that hopefully we might see in the game. Anyway, I think these stories are great and are especially interesting reads considering what we might get from Peter Parker in the game. And like I said, I think if Spider-Man is an influencer in Marvel's Avengers, that there could be a lot of similarities between his depiction and the depiction of Screwball in the comics. So I recommend you check out her comic book appearances. Now, we learned from a Game Informer article that we'd be seeing the Spider-Man villain Molten Man, as well as his love interest and Spider-Man character Liz Allen in the Spider-Man Hero event. Now, if you're not familiar with Molten Man, he's a fantastic Spider-Man villain that ties into Peter's personal life in a delightfully complicated way. Seeing him potentially coming to Marvel's Avengers is one of the reasons why I love the game so much. Like the Super Adaptoid, I feel the game tries its best to reference parts of Marvel continuity that other pieces of Marvel media haven't referenced as much. Anyway, my first recommendation for Molten Man would be his first appearance in the Amazing Spider-Man comics, way back in the days of Stan Lee and Lee Ditko, which if you remember earlier, classics, go check them out, seriously. But if you're looking for a more contemporary Molten Man story, I'd recommend the sensational Spider-Man story featuring the character. This takes place during the original Civil War era of the comics and has Peter Parker unmasked to the public. Now, really quickly, I wanted to give a big thank you to @Carlos_Esconde on Twitter, who helped me out with this section of the video. Specifically, among other things, they recommended checking out Spectacular Spider-Man number 184 for a better understanding of the relationship between the Molten Man and Liz Allen, which I think makes a lot of sense and is a really interesting suggestion. In general, Carlos is a huge Spider-Man fan with a lot of really interesting takes on the character and his mythology, so check him out if you're interested. And again, thank you so much for the help on the video. Anyway, let's move on before Morbius comes in. I have like a habit of people interrupting before I transition between chapters or parts, so let's just keep going. And the other piece of Spider-Man media that I'm reminded of when looking at the promotional material is the MCU. Obviously, Spider-Man has become more and more recognized as an Avenger over the years, and I think that's primarily due to his Marvel Cinematic Universe version of himself. But like many Spider-Man fans, I'm not really that into Peter Parker being an Avenger, and I'm happy to see so far that the Crystal Dynamics version of Spider-Man is apprehensive to join the Avengers as well. It's not that he dislikes the Avengers, it's just that he has a lot going on. Not only is Peter Parker a street-level hero who cares about street-level crime and helping his community specifically, but he also wants to protect his identity, and sometimes getting close to his superhero friends can be at odds with that goal. Anyway, I really like the direction that the team is going in with Spider-Man when it comes to the Avengers in this game. But my last comic book recommendation before I go is New Avengers by Brian Michael Bendis. This is essentially the original story that introduced Peter Parker to the Avengers, and so you can see what Peter Parker's early days as an Avenger were like. Although keep in mind, he had been a part of the Avengers several times before this, but this is his first, like, official joining of the team.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're just jealous that the movie isn't called Carrot or something.
What? No, I
No, it just sounds like you're jealous. You don't care about when good things happen to Michael Morbius.
Wow, I didn't think I would hurt his feelings that much. Is it rude to say that I hurt his feelings? No, I feel like that's what happened. Oh, man. Everybody's so sensitive in this house. I can't record a video without somebody having a mental breakdown and throwing a chair or running out crying. Anyway, that's gonna do it for this video. Anyway, those are my recommendations for Spider-Man that I think you should check out before he comes to the game. What do you think of my recommendations? Are you going to check out any of my suggestions? And do you have any suggestions that you think that I missed? I'd love to hear what Spider-Man media came to your mind when checking out the promotional material for the game in the comments below. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. If for some reason you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and to subscribe to my channel for more. As regular viewers know, I make a variety of content on my channel, and I'm always going to make the videos that I want to make. But if you see something you like, make sure to let me know, and I'll try to prioritize that kind of content in the future. If you want to watch me play Marvel's Avengers and other video games live, check me out on Twitch at twitch.tv/carrotscraps, and all my other social media, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram are at carrotscraps as well. Before I go, I wanted to give a quick shout out to Assemble for Charity. This is an event that just happened on November 26th that I was really happy to be a part of. Essentially, myself and other Avengers content creators got together on Twitch in an attempt to raise awareness and raise funds for the St. Jude's Hospital charity. I just wanted to say I was really happy to be a part of this, and if you couldn't attend the event, make sure you consider donating in some way, even if it's $1. I promise you any donation helps. Anyway, I want to thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. So first on my, this is hilarious. So a lot of times when I'm writing my scripts, I will like text to speech stuff just because it's easier for me. And so I'll get some pretty funny sentences that are not what I was intending to write at all, and I won't notice until later. So what I was intending to say was, so first on my recommendation list, but instead what I got was, so first American sedation list, which just sounds like I'm a supervillain. Like that sounds so evil. And I'm definitely on a watch list for that, and I didn't even intend to write it. First on my American sedation list. It's like 5 o'clock in the morning, and I don't want to wake anybody up, except for Morbius. He doesn't deserve to sleep. Although I don't think he's sleeping at this time. Anyway,